Thank you for your amazing grace and for your love right now. Father, I pray that you be glorified through what's done right here. Your blessing is already attended to this day, at least in my life, and I'm thankful for it. Thank you for leading in prayer. Thank you for your ministry of grace. And I pray you just multiply what you've already begun. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so this is, if you look at Dilbert at all, watch Dilbert, well, if you don't, this is him. So this is Dogbert. So I read the dinosaurs evolved into the bird family. That's exactly correct, Dogbert. But most people don't realize that there was a very difficult period when some dinosaurs started evolving into birds. Learning to fly was the hardest part, and living in trees was a real nuisance. Dogbert is, well, not Dogbert, Dilbert is the strip character. And he is, I think, he is funny, clever. So today I'm gonna go through, I've got two of these. If, pass out one of these, everybody. I'll pass out one of these. This is just a lecture guide.
Take one each, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is John Lennox. I'm going to start with this one. So John Lennox, he's brilliant, and he's very well spoken. So you can get him on YouTube. He's on there all over the place. You Google his name, you can find all kinds of stuff that he is involved with. But he was a mathematician, philosopher, Christian apologist, has an MA, PhD degree at Cambridge, Doctor of Science degree in math by the University of Cardiff, also holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Oxford, an MA degree in bioethics from the University of Surrey. So he quoted this Ludwig Wittgenstein saying, "The great delusion of modernity is that the laws of nature explain the universe for us." He says they describe it, but they don't explain it. They don't explain why it is. They can account for, okay, if this happens, then this will happen. That's what it does. But it doesn't explain it doesn't explain anything. It tells you what it does. It describes it. It's a description rather than explanation. So Dr. Lennox says there are different levels of explanation. That's what this lecture is about. There are different levels. And we've gotten to a place because we're so sophisticated and so scientifically oriented. For example, I studied agricultural economics at the university, undergraduate and graduate degree. So there are some people that believe economics is a behavioral deal. It's not mathematical. You can put math in it. In fact, they've done it. They put a lot of math into it, so it seems like a hard science. But there are some people out there that are studied and involved in it, say it's a behavioral science. You can math it all day long, but it's still a behavioral science, what people do and why they do it. And you can math it, but still, when it boils down to, it's a behavioral science. Well, there are two sides in the arena of economics that look at things differently. Some people like to make it hard science, so they have a lot of math in it. And some people don't think it's so important to have that. Not that it's excluded, but it's not the fundamental thing to have more math in it to make it, to qualify it as being hard science. So he's taking a look at the difference in levels of explanation. So he says, for example, pot of water is boiling. There's two plausible reasons. One, scientific law will tell you the mechanism. The radiant heat is generated by the stove. It then conducts to heat through the pot into the pan. Water near the bottom, the water is heated, molecules begin to rise, just like in this room. If you put a stove in the center, it would draw the cold air in, it would rise as hot air, it would cool as it travels around the ceiling and down the walls, and it'd be drawn back in as cooler air into the heat. And so you get convection going on. Well, that's what he's looking to here. This is radiant heat. So as the water is heated, molecules increase movement, expands, becomes less dense than the water above it, is heated, expanding water is lighter, etc., etc. So he talks about how this is defined. You can scientifically tell what's going on. That's fine. That's one reason. The other reason may seem funny at first, but according to personal agency, I want a cup of tea. The scientific part of it isn't important. I made myself a cup of coffee just before I came here. How it got to be here is not important. I just put coffee in, the amount that I think would qualify when I put milk and sugar to still taste like coffee. And then I pushed a button and it came out, put some milk in it, put some sugar in it, and I'm on my way. I didn't think about how it was operating. I didn't think about the heat exchange. I didn't think about the coffee machine heating the water. I'm thankful that the coffee machine doesn't produce coffee that tastes metallic. Some of the cheaper models, you get an aluminum taste. I don't care for that personally. I mean, I will drink coffee with it, but I just as soon have something and I have something that's nice and it doesn't do that. But anyway, the scientific explanation, this is the point. The scientific explanation is obviously not the same as the personal explanation. So which of the two explanations is more important? Well, at this time, for John Lennox, and that's his picture, the tea was. He knows about the other. He could teach a class on it. But it doesn't matter. He just wanted a cup of tea. How it got to be there is because he wanted it. So the heat explanation is more important in a physics lesson, but not necessarily outside of it, even though it's entirely true. Do you catch that? Just because we scientifically attach things to it doesn't make them more important. That you can look at two things from different angles, and you can argue about the importance, but it's a dead issue to do that. You don't need to. Like, it's nice if you can qualify something scientifically, but in this case, it didn't matter. He didn't care about the scientific explanation of it. He just wanted a cup of tea, and he did what it needed to be done to get that cup of tea. So people have been boiling water for tea for years before any understanding of molecular excitement and convection was uncovered. For years. So this demonstrates there are obviously different levels of meaningful explanation. There are different levels of meaningful explanation. There are different levels of meaningful explanation. The scientific explanation of law of mechanics does not contradict or exclude the explanation of personal agency. It complements it. It's got to be one or the other. Both are valid. They're coming from different directions, but they're both valid. Both valid explanations. You say, well, just wanting it, that doesn't mean anything. Well, it did to John Lennox. My wanting a cup of coffee this afternoon. It meant something to me. So, well, however, what we're being told, particularly by the scientific community, you've been being told for as long as you've been in school, and its media agents, is that the only valid explanation is the scientific one. And that's not true. That just depends on where you're standing. If you're a scientist studying something, you might think, well, that's the most important. But that is not necessarily true for everyone. And for somebody to think, well, I think it's more important. Well, good. That's fine business. You can do that, but it's not necessarily more important for everybody. This has an important application to where we as Christians live and what we face. Newton's law of gravitation does not in any way compete with the idea of God. Because we're coming to an idea, you've gotten this before in this class, the idea of God versus science, religion versus science. There isn't any religious versus science. It was something generated by people that wanted to do away with the idea of God. And so they said there's this conflict. Well, there isn't a conflict. A good scientist, you can be a good scientist and believe in God or not. You can be serious, you can be committed, you can be examining, you're going to look at things differently, but it doesn't minimize your ability as a scientist. I think you're constrained if you don't include the possibility of there being a divine creator. In fact, when you look at the intelligent design movement, many in that movement are not Christians at all. Now, the ones in the media too, that you're going to look at, two of them are decidedly. You can tell by what they say. And the third one, I think, is as well. But as a group, it isn't a requirement to believe in a Judeo-Christian God. You can believe what you want. Just the idea that, look at, it had to be some kind of intelligent life that created this thing. It couldn't come up by itself. Scientifically, it couldn't have come up together. By what we know about science currently, there's nothing that says that this thing could happen just by chance. The possibility is so entirely, well, it's impossible. Everything we know right now would say that. God would say that. He created it. So, at least I believe he does. So, the idea of science competing with the idea of God, it doesn't compete. They are supplemental. So, Newton, I hope he said this. You can't trust all these things. Some of them are pretty funny. Like Abraham Lincoln didn't like cell phones. I mean, just put it in a nice way, but it's just nice. So everything you read, but I think I looked this up and it was true. Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who set the planets in motion. Why they are there. Well, we have the why. We have part of the why. I'm sure when we meet God, we'll get the rest of the why. I mean, it'll be pretty amazing. Why he did what he did. Why he bothered to create billions of galaxies with billions of stars each. And, you know, for lights in the sky, I mean, it's pretty amazing that he would do the creative majesty. And that's, well, obviously, I'm not God. I'm not even close. I thought if I grew my hair out, I'd look more like Einstein, but it doesn't work that way. He didn't have hair like mine. So I'm going to cut here pretty quick. Anyway, Richard Swinburne is an emeritus professor of philosophy at the University of Oxford. So when you looked at this stuff, when you did this, I don't think I would have put this up had I not done some checking to be sure that Newton actually said it. Because people can quote that somebody said something, it's easy to do. All you have to do is type it in. But it's not necessarily true. And I don't know that I'm gonna get everything, but I'm kind of a hawk about that. I like to be sure that what I'm disseminating is accurate. If that people really said what, and sometimes you dig for a long time to find out whether it's true or not, where they really did. But anyway, so for over 50 years, Swinburne has been an influential opponent of philosophical arguments for the existence of God. He writes, I do not deny that science explains how some things work. That's inserted for clarity. But I postulate God to explain why science explains. The very success of science in showing us how deeply orderly the natural world is provides strong grounds for believing that there is even a deeper cause for that order. That's good. It's not within the explanatory power of physics and chemistry to cope with meaning. You've got to postulate a mind. And this goes on the last couple here. Darwin's doubt. With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Okay, that was Darwin's doubt. And the last couple of statements add on to that. It says, modern humanism is the faith that through science humankind can know the truth and so be free. But if Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, this is impossible, because the human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. If we were created by random chance and mutation and time, if that's how we came to existence, it doesn't have anything to do with truth. It has to do with survival. So evaluating things, thinking, oh, this is where we are, we're striving for truth. Well, who knows that we're doing that? If we're a product of evolution, that wouldn't be in the mix. And there's this other one, this fellow here said, this Alvin Pandingian. If Dawkins is right, that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then he has given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own atheism. You see that? Do you read that? If we've just been produced by mindless, unguided natural processes, no God. So what would something that came without conscience, without internal value, just unguided processes, mutations, a lot of time, then how could we trust what we think to be of value or support what we're espousing or producing? You couldn't do that. It's a contradiction. So that is John Lennox. That is what I have on John Lennox. So I would encourage you, I think, no, it's the other one I do have, so. I'll throw up some, I have some videos that John Lennox did some talking on. As I said, he doesn't believe in a recent six-day creation. I'm not sure exactly where he stands, but he says, well, it's, in his understanding, it's not a necessity to believe that. I haven't heard him argue with he's argued with evolution, people that are believing in evolution, and he does it very kindly and very thoughtfully, And I think well, it's entertaining, and I think it's worthwhile. But this is, so I'll get you some, let me write down, I'll remember. Okay, so J. Harlan Bretz. And this is indicative, not of every scientist, the science community, the aggregate science community, when they take something and lay hold of it, it's difficult to extract them from it. And I'd say that'd probably be true with anybody. But the science community, this is what this exposes to me. So in 1923, Bretz observed Montana, Idaho, Eastern Washington, Oregon area of the United States. He observed it on foot. He didn't fly over it. He was on foot or automobile or other conveyance, horse, whatever. But he went over all this area. And he went over it looking and thinking, what caused this to happen? Why do we see what we see? This is what it was just interesting. He was just asking questions. He looked out there and he asked a question. And Jason, in the prison last night, Jason Gobin mentioned Luke 17, where there were 10 lepers, and one returned and thanked him for healing. And Jesus said, where are the other 10? And then he said, your faith has made you whole. And I thought for myself, when he said it, I thought that's interesting. He was already cleansed. He didn't have leprosy anymore. All 10 of them didn't have leprosy. So when Jesus says that his faith has made him whole, I thought, well, that's a little different. Why would faith come after being made healed? Except there's more to life than healing. But I had to think about it a minute. I had to think, why would he say that? And when I thought about it, actually, one of the prisoners came up and said what he thought about it. And what he thought about it was, on reflection, was really clear. But I had to think about it. It wasn't just, oh, yeah, okay. There's a lot of things in Scripture that we think we know, it feels like we know, but to really ask yourself, why did he say that? Why did it happen in this way? Syrophoenician woman, Jesus said she had great faith, and it was about what she did rather than she believed something. In fact, I'd written it wrongly for a while. I looked at it and thought, well, it's when she got up and left, when he said that your daughter's healed, and she did it. I thought that was demonstrating great faith. But he said she had great faith before that. I thought, whoa, what's he talking about? What's he seeing there? What is he seeing that's great faith producing? So, this guy, in 1923, looking around at this stuff and thinking, how? Why? How could it be like this? And so, what he saw was, and you can see it, you can read it, a maze of enormous empty canyons, very large empty waterfall gorges, huge boulders, some more than 30 feet in diameter and weighing 200 tons, deposited in decreasing size, giant ripple marks laying hundreds of miles from any major body of water, deeply eroded land surfaces, a deep bed of rich topsoil covering Oregon's Willamette Valley, and what appeared to be extensive stratified lake structures in Montana. So that's what he saw. He's been looking at this for years, but that's what he saw. And he concluded that it was the work of a catastrophic flood. He stood alone in his assessment for 40 years and endured the continual scorn of those in his field of geology. And most of them, and you'll read later, most of them didn't even visit, were just saying, well, they were blowing it off because catastrophic flood is something that's pre-science. It's before, you believe that before science, but after science, you don't believe that anymore. So they wrote him off. And you see this, the deep red of rich topsoil covering Oregon's Willamette Valley. Well, it does. And it all came from Washington and Idaho. All that topsoil came down. It was washed away from Oregon, or away from Idaho, and away from eastern Washington, leaving what they call in eastern Washington the scab lands. I mean, they're just denuded of rich topsoil. Well, it had been there, except this thing washed down, although, so Oregon's got Washington's land, rascals. But, so he hypothesized that ancient glaciers blocked rivers in Montana, creating a great inland sea, Glacial Lake Missoula, you can find it. In some places almost 2,000 feet deep. When the water pressure caused the ice dam to break, a tremendous body of water ravaged the area, literally bulldozing and scouring away rich soil and boulders in eastern Washington, and depositing them in the Willamette Valley south of Portland, 600 miles away. It left what is known as the scablands behind. That's in Washington and so Idaho, but Washington particularly. So he made that conclusion. So, but the very fact that he mentioned catastrophic flood, no matter where it came from, or that it wasn't universal, but they just this. Well, in 1927, he's quoted as saying, an understanding of the scablands of eastern Washington state involves imagination and courageous departure from accepted views. And the following year, he said, ideas without precedent are generally looked upon with disfavor, and men are shocked if their conceptions of an orderly world are challenged. He was talking directly about his peers, his fellow geologists, the people that were following uniformitarianism, that things happened the way they always have and they haven't changed, and there wasn't any catastrophe anywhere. But, or they would qualify that with earthquakes and volcanoes, but nonetheless, no catastrophic flood. And this is a quote from the Smithsonian, which is a decidedly pro-evolutionary organization. It wasn't, its founder wasn't. The founder of Smithsonian was a Christian, as I understand, but they're not anymore. So he wrote, this fellow wrote for Smithsonian, said that Bretz argued that deep canyons and pockmarked buttes in the scablands had been created by a sudden catastrophic flood, not, as most of his peers believed, by eons of gradual erosion. It was a bold challenge to the prevailing principle of human uniformitarianism, which held that the earth was shaped by processes that can be observed in the present. Since a flood of almost biblical proportions envisioned by Bretz had never been seen, it was dismissed as a throwback to the pre-scientific doctrine of catastrophism. Not until the late 1940s did other geologists begin to present new evidence supporting the flood theory. And satellite imagery in the 1970s provided the final vindication. Bretz had the satisfaction of living long enough to see his once heretical ideas become the new orthodoxy. In 1979, at the age of 96, he received the Penrose Medal, geology's highest honor. Took him a long time. Now, so Bretz, this guy, he taught at my high school, Franklin High School in Seattle. I went there. Go Quakers, the Franklin Quakers. That's who they were. That's who I was once. But he taught in 1908. So that was a couple years before I got there, so I didn't have an opportunity to sleep in his class. Which at that time, I would have been doing. Not to my honor, I wasted. Well, I didn't have to unlearn a lot of stuff because I never got it the first time around. I've had to get it later. So it's not all bad, but I seriously did not pay attention. So, I think that I'm gonna, well, you got this, so I'll go with it. Geological Lake Missoula, it's a story of scientists grappling. This is another from an avowed evolutionist. So this guy isn't supporting creationism or anything to do with creationism. He probably doesn't think that what Brett's discovered has anything to do with creationism, but nonetheless, what he writes is a story of scientists grappling with emerging scientific controversy. Some handle it well, others miserably, as personalities, pride, and outright prejudice supersede scientific evidence. My friends, we live in a world of people. We live in a world of people. And the overwhelming majority of the people living in this world are not following Christ. They're not checked when they start to tell something that isn't true. When they get angry and want to get even, there's nothing to check them wanting to get even. They can just go ahead and do it. That's what everybody else does. So it's not surprising that when you evaluate what's being said, and it's obvious in this case, and there are many, many, many other cases in the scientific community in the last several hundred years, where somebody's come out with something that was true, but they had a hard fight going through because there was so much resistance. So, this is not how science should work, but often it does that way, because scientists are fallible human beings, and science is a human pursuit. So, they're human beings. They're like you and I. So, the geologist who listened to Brett's, read his second paper in 1923 when he was 41, were shocked to hear him evoke sudden catastrophe to explain the scabland landscapes of eastern Washington. In their view, it was a reversion to the unscientific thinking of some 125 years before. In the 1790s, James Hutton had argued that the earth was transformed not by unimaginable catastrophes, but by imperceptibly slow changes. Uniformitarianism, many of which we see with us around us today. To this day, most geologists consider it nothing less than heresy to invoke a catastrophic explanation for a geological event. You just don't do it. Brest knew that the very idea of catastrophic flooding would threaten and anger the geological community, which did. And here's why. Among geologists in the 20s, catastrophic explanations for geological events other than volcanoes and earthquakes were considered wrong-minded heresy. And they believed it strongly. This may seem a little surprising, at least to those unfamiliar with the history of geology. How could one man's hypothesis, affecting only a limited region of the earth, threaten an entire discipline? Isn't it the duty of science to be open-minded? Well, of course. That is what one might expect. If we assume the scientific community is more rational than other segments of society. Now I thought that was nice. I mean, that places it where it is, I think. To assume that the scientific community is more rational than other segments of society, but scientists, unfortunately, are as human as the rest of us and prone to irrationality. Limited habits of thinking and saddest of all, professional pride get in the way of the truth, of looking for the truth. In fact, they do with people seeking God. So, the last thing, I'm just going to jump down here. Very few scientists of any discipline come to daring new conclusions as they consider the evidence. Most go through life believing what they had learned in college. Now, I don't want to bash what you might be learning here. I hope you learn from God and are able to stand on His foundation. But without that, what they learned in college, resenting challenges to the settled beliefs and disliking those that present them. So, if you're interested I will, well, you have this on this sheet, and I can post this. But there's a 5-minute perspective on the scablands of eastern Washington, decided by evolutionary bias, but nonetheless, there's a little, it's a 5-minute perspective on it. And this, a creation perspective looking at the scablands, this is 52 minutes, it's a little longer, obviously. I'll give you extra credit for if you want to look at that without sleeping, and write at least half a page synopsis of what he presented for a little more extra credit. So you can get some extra credit from watching it, get a little more from writing a little bit on it. So that's that. Okay? Any questions, anybody? So, then. Oh, that's right, that's what I was gonna do. So, I hadn't gone through this altogether, and I'll do that. We've got time to do it now, so I'm gonna do that. I haven't graded them. I should have them graded by next class period. So we talked about, I think, the first couple of them. We got down to number 3. Ken Ham states that in this view, and I'll put this, I'll put up these answers to media 1 to you, for you. If I don't disappear this piece of paper before I get home, I'll try to do that as soon as possible. So you have these to look at if you want to, well, I'll give you paper back, but you probably have a copy of it anyway, and you can look and see. And as I said before, if you have if you want to discuss if I took off points and you don't think they should be taken off, or you didn't think I understood with clarity what you were saying, and you were talking about this and I didn't get it, which is possible, it's happened. So I'd appreciate if you would inform me and we could talk about it. I'm not gonna think any less of you if you do that. Oh, okay, so we went through there. Okay, stop here. So, number 5, when looking at a conflict in our culture right now, in regard to moral issues like the gender issue, gay marriage, abortion, and racism, we find it's really not a battle about those issues, but it's a battle about what? This is according to this video I had you read, or have you watch. It's our foundation, or starting point, that has resulted in a worldview conflict. So he says a number of times that it's our worldview that's in conflict. We're looking at life differently. Looking at it from a biblical perspective and looking at it from a secular perspective, one without God or with many gods, is not going to bring you to the same place. It's going to bring you different places. And so it's not that you are espousing transgender, or you are espousing gay marriage and you aren't, you are and you aren't. There are reasons why you would, and a worldview will give a foundation for why you're choosing what you're choosing. A secular worldview would naturally fall into this. Everybody that holds a secular worldview doesn't necessarily buy into this, but if you hold something other than biblical, you don't really have grounds for saying other than a feeling. Well, there's some that would probably argue better than that, but. So, it's our foundation. It's our starting point that resulted in a worldview conflict. That's the conflict. Not about this issues, it's our worldview. That's what he's saying. It's not about the issues themselves. They're a part of it, but underneath the issue is the worldview that we hold. So he mentions a bunch of issues, number 6. He mentions a bunch of issues that fly in the face of biblical worldview. But he says they are not the essential issues that need to be addressed when initially speaking with a non-believer. What needs to be addressed first? It was stated above, and again, it's their worldview, their foundation of beliefs. It gives a framework from which to discuss why they believe the way they do. So, you can argue with people about the issues. And if people hold strongly to them, you don't get much mileage with an angry person. You can talk to them, but if they're angry, it's the likelihood of it going somewhere positively is real slim. But asking about, well, what kind of foundational belief system do they have? And you can say that without being threatening. You can dig after. I made a decision to read the Bible for the first time, well, for two reasons. But one reason was my friend, a good friend, that I appreciated the way he thought. He thought systematically and clearly, at least growing up in high school. I admired that, and we spent a lot of time together talking about Eastern religions, because both of us were into that stuff. Well, we were into looking for truth, and we weren't looking at Christianity. We were looking at Eastern religions, because we'd ruled out Christianity. Well, anyway, he got saved, and he didn't tell me he got saved. But I went to visit him one night, had dinner with him, and so he started asking me, what do you want to do with your life? I said, well, I want to do something in fine arts. I want to be an artist. And I said, what kind of artist? What kind of art do you want to do? He kept asking questions. And I kept giving him answers. I gave him answers to everything he asked. But after a couple of questions, I realized I didn't know what I was at. I was giving him answers, but I didn't know the answer. I was just giving him stuff. I mean, he was my friend. He was asking deep questions about what I wanted to do, about the future, and I hadn't, so I tried to give him an answer, but I knew in my mind I didn't know what the answer was on that. And so he told me that finally I said, okay, well, just before I left, he said, I've been enlightened. I thought, enlightened? Man, that's Eastern religion talk. I know that is. So I said, well, tell me how. He said, no, it won't be the same for you. I said, come on, man, tell me how. And he said, it won't be the same for you. I won't do it. I said, well, I'm not leaving until you do. So he finally said, well, okay, I got it out of reading Paul's letter to the Romans. Paul's letter to the Romans. The Bible? I said, yeah. I said, okay, thanks, man. And I got in my car and went home. Got a pack of cigarettes and read through New King James Version of Romans twice that night. Coffee and cigarettes, all the way through, and then all the way through again. And at the end of that, I thought, I wonder if his enlightenment has something to do with God. I mean, he didn't say anything about Jesus. He didn't say anything. And then I thought, I've never read this book. And the people that I like to read make a mockery of it, and I can't get their jokes because I've never read this thing, so I'll read it and then I'll be able to laugh with them. So my motivation for reading the Bible was pretty poor. But it was through reading the Bible that God became real to me. The Old Testament. Anyway, so you don't have to have a 2x4 and whack people with your worldview and tell them they need to get lined out with what's right, People are people, and you can address them, if you address them kindly, like the Bible says, with gentleness and kindness. If you address people that way, you get a lot more mileage. I don't know how many of you pass out tracts. Any people here pass out tracts? Well, I do. And I found if I have a tract that I can get some humor on, like I have a tract, they don't make them anymore, but I used to pass these out, and it showed optical illusions. And I'd like to give them to guys, and so I'd give them to a guy. I said, it's optical illusions. And there's some good ones. I knew it. One of them I couldn't figure out until I drew it out in big, and then I could see where the difference was, but I couldn't because I knew the math, but the math didn't line up with what I was seeing. Anyway, so I'd say, well, I buy cars like that. And if a guy laughs, then he gets that joke. It's not a big joke, but he gets it. And if interacting with someone, I mean, it's total stranger. I've never seen this person in my life before. I don't know what they believe, but if I can get a connection, either something funny that we'll laugh together on, I have a whole lot better avenue to step in to something a little more serious. And I like to leave when I leave somebody. After talking to them, I like to shake their hands and I like to get their first name, because then for the next couple of years, I'll be praying for them. So I got lists of names of people. And a lot of them happened years ago, but I know where I saw that person. I know that one was an answer to prayer. I prayed that God would open the door for me to talk to that person, and God did. I mean, it's not just doing a duty, but you want to engage. You want to engage, yeah. So, number 7, he says that those who have been educated in the public school system have been taught that scientists start with evidence to develop their theories. He goes on to say that's a load of nonsense. Why does he say that? They don't start with evidence. They have beliefs that determine how they look at the evidence. A creationist will see exactly the same evidence they do, but come to different conclusions about it. So, it's not that they start with evidence, they start with perspective. They start with a worldview that influences how they look at things, and then they develop their theories. I think that's right on. So, looking at the problems in our culture, abortion, gay marriage, etc., they're not the real problems, they're only symptoms of the foundational problem. Once again, this whole thing, you see this repeated. It's the foundation. It's your worldview. It's the assumptions you make about life that determines how you're going to interpret it. It's in everything we do. So, in this video, Ken Ham talks about thinking foundationally. That's what he's thinking about. And specifically, he means taking what is stated in Genesis 1 through Genesis 11 as God's true word and evaluating what you see here and take action on through that filter. Now, he would not argue with the word of God in the whole being what you need to take into consideration. But specifically, what Answers in Genesis has done is take the foundational, because he can take from Genesis 1 through 11, he can take all the doctrines that we have, orthodox doctrines in Christianity, and lay them out for it, and he can do it from Genesis 1 through 11. And what's the chief threat for not thinking foundationally? Without a solid biblical foundation, you can be more easily drawn into making choices that are inconsistent with Scripture and leading others to do the same. So that's what I put. I will post this, and you can see I just need to be sure that people in the other class have gotten theirs in. So, okay, let me do this, just to get a little bit of a start on this one. Okay, this is longevity. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. But I just want you aware. So there are other scientific reasons specifically for people living over 900 years. That doesn't prove it happened. It just says, are there reasons to suggest that it could be possible to live 900 years? And there are. First one, the magnetic field of the earth. Okay, magnetic field, this is an artist illustration of the magnet. This is our Earth. There's the sun. These are solar wind particles coming out of the sun. And fortunately, we have these belts that deflect them and keep them from, in fact, the ones that, if you see this, they're going down over the North Pole and the South Pole. Those are what, when there is a lot of intense activity from the sun, that's where we get the northern lights. And when there's a real lot of it, that's where we get the northern lights. You see them last semester, didn't they?
Yes.
Did anybody see him here?
I was in Ohio when I saw him.
Okay, well, that's because that was how it happened. They were coming, so that radiating energy was coming down over the poles, and usually it's localized, but when it's really strong, it spreads. In fact, it's spread down to the West Indies and Florida. They've seen them down there before. Anyway, so Earth's magnetic field, that's one of the things that could account for, it's generated by our planet's interior, extends into space, creating a region known as a magnetosphere. Without that magnetic field, that bubble, without this, we would be bombarded with radioactive material, radiating. We've been bombarded with magnetic and solar wind and all the other stuff that is emanating from the sun that is dangerous to life. Cancer forming, dangerous to life. Without this, without that magnetosphere, that's what it's called, the solar wind would erode our atmosphere, devoiding our planet of the life-giving air we breathe. According to NASA, the magnetosphere also protects Earth from large quantities of particle radiation emitted during coronal mass ejections, CMEs. The events, we're going to talk about that in the next section. And also from cosmic rays, atom fragments raining down on Earth from deep space. The magnetosphere repels harmful energy away from the Earth and traps it in zones called the Van Allen radiation belts. These donut-shaped belts of radiation can swell with the high energy particles when the sun's activity increases, further protecting our planet. And it is interesting to note, since 1835, they've been able to evaluate what the magnetic field, its strength has been. It's been scientifically measured only since 1835. But since that time, the strength of the Earth's magnetic field has been in measured decline. They can tell that it's declining in strength. So, I said this before, I think in class, if we carry that declining period backward in history, so if it's declining like this from 1835 to now, and then we just go back, say it continues, we're assuming it stays at the same level. So we're making an assumption in taking it back in time. And if it was going like this, and we took it back in time, then the farther back in time you get, the greater it would be. That would make sense. Well, that's not terrible to do. It's not good science, because you're assuming things about its trajectory, that it hasn't changed. You're making assumptions. But if you made those assumptions, it's not the best thing to do, but at the time of Christ, about 2,000 years ago, the magnetic field may have been 10 times stronger than it is today, which would keep out a whole lot of radiant energy radiated from the sun. It would keep a lot of that, and solar stuff that comes out from beyond our solar system. It would keep out a whole lot more of that, which would tend to enable people to live longer. The things that affect us because of the radiant energy wouldn't be doing it. And if we continue back still further to the time of creation, the Earth's magnetic field might have been in the neighborhood of 20 times stronger. Dr. Morris notes that if the trend continues back even further, it could get so strong only about 10,000 years before it would cause the Earth to be entirely uninhabitable. Why is this important? Laboratory experiences in animals have shown that exposure to intense magnetism from the time of conception to the time of puberty stabilizes their chromosomes, slows their aging process, and increases longevity, and other things. So, I'll see you on Friday.